Good evening and welcome to the June 28th, 2023 East Lansing Planning Commission meeting.
Did you give him the heads?
What? Yeah, I did. Yeah,
Sorry, my bad.
all set. Mr. Dempsey, would you please take a roll?
Yes, good evening.
Chairperson Sullivan.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Bowman.
Here.
Commissioner Boyd.
Here.
Commissioner Denault.
Here.
Commissioner Hendricks. Commissioner Lapine. Commissioner Wagner. Commissioner Williams.
Here.
We have 5 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Williams, seconded by Commissioner Denault. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. On to item 1.3, approval of the minutes from the May 10th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes from May 10th.
Moved by Commissioner Boyd, seconded by Commissioner Williams. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. On to item number 2, committee reports. I don't believe we have any updates there. Item number 3, staff reports. Mr. Dempsey?
Yes, just a couple updates. One is regarding a project that you recommended for approval. That was the Jolly Pumpkin Mash expansion. So that was approved by City Council at their meeting last Tuesday. So that project will be moving forward. And then depending on what decision you make this evening regarding the Grove Street rezoning, we do not have any other current applications for the first meeting in July, which I believe was scheduled for the 12th. But whatever the second Wednesday is, to be precise. So it looks like we may not have a meeting. We do have a couple projects, it looks like, for the second meeting in July. Just an update there. That's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you much. On to item number 4, commissioner announcements. Are there any commissioner announcements tonight?
I actually will be out of town.
Vice Chair?
Thank you. On the 12th, so if there is a meeting, I will not be in attendance.
Noted. All right, that brings us on to item number 5, communications from citizens. Item 5.1, written communications. I would characterize these as all on item 7.1, the Grove Street rezoning item on the agenda. Some of the items in support, some of the items outlining some concerns about that item on the agenda. On to item number 5.2, verbal from the audience. So this is the time to speak up on anything that is on tonight's agenda or anything off of tonight's agenda, should you wish. So please, if anyone wants to come forward, just please fill out a card up there with your contact info.
I think it's still speaking under the natural business item or...
Correct. You can speak on anything on tonight's agenda, including item 7.1.
I think he's asking.
Oh, no. This is the time to come speak. Yeah, before the...
So if anybody wants to speak...
We had the public hearing for that item last meeting. So now is the time to come and speak on any item that's on tonight's agenda, should you wish to address the commission. Yeah. Thanks for the clarification.
Tim Rosowski. I still live at 613 Grove Street. So I addressed the commission during the public hearing on May 10th, and so I don't really have any additional comments. I did review some of the letters that were submitted, so but it doesn't really change my view that there's nothing compelling in this project, and we think that the risks, the potential damages to the neighborhood offset, any gains to the community from constructing whatever might be constructed there. So, all right.
Thank you.
Hi, Josh Ramirez Roberts. I have a letter from the Bailey Community Association that I would like to read. So, dear members of the East Lansing Planning Commission, the Bailey Community Association is writing to express our strong opposition to the rezoning request submitted to the EL Planning Commission. Hagan Realty LLC has requested that the City of East Lansing rezone 7 parcels of land from R2 to RM32, totaling 1.854 acres, located along Burcham and Grove Streets. Our opposition is based on the following points. The latest housing study commissioned by the City of East Lansing does not support this type of rezoning in our neighborhood, and the need for student housing in East Lansing has been satisfied. Additional or upgraded student housing will compete for the same body of potential student renters. A priority of our association is to maintain East Lansing single-family homes. Despite the landlords and developers' assurances, approving this rezoning request has the potential to further degrade the Grove Street corridor by increasing student rentals and decreasing single-family community homes. This change is already underway, and we question the appropriateness and need for more student housing adjacent to valued community assets such as the East Lansing High School, East Lansing Public Library, and the Hannah Community Center. Future land use planning for the City of East Lansing calls for increased housing density. We believe increased housing density should focus on non-student housing. Since as already mentioned, there is no apparent need for additional student housing. Thank you for this opportunity to provide comments and for your attention to this important neighborhood issue. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, I'm Betty Brown, and my husband spoke at the last meeting regarding the 700 block of Grove. And I have a letter that I've also submitted to Mr. Dempsey and would like to share with you. I'm not going to read the whole letter, but I just really would like to reiterate that the council and the planning commission really think about the long-term effects of this decision and the impact that it would make on our city. I also feel like the spot where we're living is a beautiful neighborhood for myself and my family. We have established very strong relationships with our neighbors. We get together and have parties, not with a keg, but they're still really fun. And I also feel as though the location of our home near the library, near the Hannah Center and the high school truly suits families. So I just would like you to, as you continue to consider all the facts and information, please consider the long-term effects that it would have for our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
I'm Lisa Hominick, 222 Ridge Road. I spoke at the last public hearing as well, and I also am still against. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but one of our other neighbors was unable to come tonight, and he just wanted to register his vote against the project as well for Stan Foster at 257 Ridge Road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Stewart at 616 Grove Street and previously 613 Grove Street and also on Bailey Street. So I've had a 60-year period in the Bailey community, and particularly on the historic College Grove area. I wrote a second letter following our previous meeting, and I'd like to read just a few of those points. Thank you for your consideration. The Stewart family letter from James, Joffrey, and Deborah Stewart is in support for maintaining College Grove as a historic district by maintaining the current R2 single-family zoning in the 700 block of Grove Street. Thanks to Planning Commission members for being active listeners and their voluntary service to the East Lansing community. We know that our dad, Roger Stewart, spent many hours researching and discussing with residents when serving on East Lansing boards and commissions. We write and speak to you as some of the persons, along with our neighbors, most affected by your decision this evening. We've grown up, studied, taught, researched, and lived in the College Grove district area for over 60 years. During this time, our family members and I have paid taxes to the city of East Lansing and chosen to reside in the location due to walking distance to schools, the university where we work and teach, and the libraries. The area continues to be ideal for families and young professionals. There is no reason to rezone 7 properties identified in the application. From attending the May 10th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting, it appeared the applicant, some of the East Lansing employees, and commission members referred to the East Lansing Master Plan developed in 2018. It is important to note at this time, much of the master plan is unapplicable since so many new apartment buildings and housing units have been built since the plan was designed. A need no longer exists as previous. Also, the master plan is a working guide, not a decree. The master plan should be revised according to relevance and changes in the current community. It is significant the 2018 master plan had little input from residents in the historic College Grove area. It is relevant that Planning Commission members review the Historic Preservation Code of the City of East Lansing, which states, to further the character and composition of its neighborhoods. The purpose is to ensure the recognition, preservation, and protection of historical and architectural sites, building structures, objects, features, and open spaces. In order to provide for the organization and establishment of historic districts significant to the cultural, social, economic, political, and architectural heritage of the City of East Lansing. It provides for the establishment of heritage neighborhoods. It encourages property owners and residents to participate in activities together to enhance, improve, and preserve neighborhoods, to stabilize and improve property values, strengthen the local community, foster civic beauty and pride, and to promote the use of historic districts and heritage neighborhoods for the education, the pleasure, and welfare of the citizens of East Lansing. Most concerning is the fact that the rezoning to RM32 allows for many more uses than what is addressed in the application. The applicant could consider other more appropriate locations. In closing, there are no benefits to rezoning or demolishing single-family homes on Grove Street for the benefit of a developer rental company in order to overbuild in the existing historic neighborhood. It will lower property values of longtime tax-paying residents. It will significantly impact traffic flow in the community on a daily basis. It will negatively change and upset the balance of a historic neighborhood. We strongly support a recommendation for as-is. Continued R2 medium-density, single and family residential homes zoning on the street we have resided and paid taxes on for over 60-plus years. Please deny the application for rezoning of 7 properties to RM32 in the 700 block of Grove Street. Thank you for your consideration of my comments. And lastly, I would like to acknowledge that the people in the 600 block of Grove Street and Ridge Road areas, many of us have not only financially contributed through our property taxes, but we've actually contributed our life energy, as my dad did, to make East Lansing a better place and to make it an area where others want to go to, both throughout the state of Michigan and now on a national level. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you in person, not over just YouTube and TV. We are a young veteran family who recently bought a house and lives nearby on Ridge Road. And we are opposed and do not support the rezoning in question. There are numerous reasons not to support rezoning and nothing compelling to support it in our eyes, unless, of course, you're poised to make big profits, making big changes to our neighborhood and community, even though most of us don't want that rezoning. why not try rehabilitating the homes with all this concern and money for affordable housing? It is also well known that a sorority has been the driving idea behind the rezoning. There should have been more transparency from the start regarding that. And regardless of the vote, best wishes to everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, do we need to take our
I
contact?
just need your name for the
Yeah,
minutes.
Titan Spirit.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
You have to state your name. Tell them who you are. Are you gonna do this or no? Okay.
I am
Brown.
William Branch Brown.
And what do you think? I don't know. It's up to you.
We have enough college kids and we don't need any more.
Is that about it? Yeah. Thank you.
I don't think that's a voter. I'm just gonna say. All right. Anyone else? All right.
I'm not sure about following that guy, but I'll do my best. Tyler McCassell with the Carpenters Local 1004, right here in Lansing, and members right in this vicinity. Want to thank you just for allowing us to speak a little bit on support for the mass timber ordinance that you're considering. And just what that means. We've been here in the city of East Lansing, and families grew up here. I actually started through the apprenticeship and got to work on tower records and a lot of things that we see coming now, even get to remodel and build on later. But just for the consideration with our future generations to build with a green application that mass timber is and what that means. So the benefit that you guys have been with the city of East Lansing and previous projects, we had apprentices like Mason Hudgens that now today is turning out as a journeyman because of the decisions you made here with some of the development, and it kept him here, and so many others like him that is important for the skilled trades. So from that, and a lot of discussion on the other feelings and stuff too, but the importance of these types of projects and what that means for us is tremendous, and the idea of being able to build with mass timber for our environment and hunter and fisherman myself, and the things that we can do to change the way we've built in an industry that is very different from when I first came in. But MSU and some of the folks have been so helpful in that with getting us started in the training, and we've committed $60 million in training centers just with the Carpenters Union alone. And our goal is to employ every student that comes out of these local school districts on these types of projects. So as you consider this, we hope that you'll do that, and it means a lot to us. So I wanted to share that. And I do have a card.
Thank you.
Does that go?
Sure. Absolutely.
I will note for the minutes that Commissioner Hendricks arrived at 7:21. All right, seeing no further, for the applicant for 8.1? We'll do that when we get to there. Is there anyone online in the queue?
There's nobody waiting in the queue.
All right. That brings us on to item number 6, public hearings. There are no public hearings tonight, so item number 7, specifically 7.1, consideration of ordinance 1520. Mr. Dempsey, do you have any updates for us?
Yeah, I do have a few updates. Before I do that, just a reminder for anybody that spoke that did not fill out a card, if they could do that and just leave it on the podium, we'll grab those. We'd like to have the correct spelling of all your names for the record, so we appreciate your help with that. If you didn't fill out a card, thank you. We did provide in your packet this evening an additional sort of supplemental report on the front end of the packet. This was generated from the questions that were asked at the last meeting where this project was, or this rezoning was considered. So We put information in there regarding the historic designation of the one house that falls within the historic district. Talked a little bit about traffic impacts, and then also the future land use designation and some information on the applicable zoning district. So looking at a number of tables in this updated report that speak to what are the allowed uses for both the master plan categories in terms of at least intended uses as stated in the master plan. Of course, those would have to be operationalized in a zoning code update, but as well providing some information on the different residential districts from R2 to RM32 in terms of density. I do want to put a really significant caveat on the table that looks at unit density, though, because as you all know, our zoning ordinance is fairly complicated. And when you look at any of the criteria in the residential districts, there are a number of factors that drive density. One, of course, is parcel size. Some districts have, or most districts have, some level of minimal parcel size. They all have, of course, setback provisions, ground coverage provisions, height restrictions, but a lot of those variables can be different depending on the particular characteristics of the property, right? Depending on how large or how small that property might be, depending on the type of structure that's proposed and how that could impact it. So these are general sort of unit estimates that really look at sort of the maximum units based on all of, or the basic criteria of looking at that square footage of the lot. Now, if you combine lots and you change the size, that can alter it. Another big driving factor behind any project, as you all know, is parking. So parking and the requirements there can often further restrict the number of units, because as you increase the parking, you're just sort of taking away ground coverage that's you could otherwise use for building coverage. So I just want to put that out there because it is a complex interplay, and it's really difficult without a specific proposal to analyze that and to look at all the permutations that might be possible. But what we wanted to do at the minimum was at least give you a relative sense of the number of units as you sort of go up the density scale, more or less, from R2 up to RM32. So that's the intent of that, to at least help you conceptualize a little bit. But with respect to the additional information, if there's any questions there, if there's any questions that the commission has on the prior information that's been presented, I'm here to take those questions.
Any questions from commissioners? I had one, and it was just more of a clarification, I guess, for the commission and the audience. So just with this simple rezoning request, this doesn't automatically allow them to build anything on this site. They still have to go through every single applicable city commission, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the rezoning would simply change the land use designation. Any project that would have to come forward would have to go through the typical site plan review process, depending on what it is in terms of a project. If it has special use permit requirements, it would have to adhere to those and go through that planning commission, city council process. Depending on traffic impacts, it could also be in front of the transportation commission for a traffic impact study, et cetera. So whatever requirements would apply to a particular application, they would have to follow those.
Thank you. Vice Chair?
I know you're, because you have to be specific and vague at the same time with this table, there are other, I believe that there are other potential restrictions associated with other zones that, say for instance, minimum lot widths or minimum lot sizes. And so I'm presuming that in this particular case, the table that you've provided for us, which is pretty helpful, actually presumes that this would all be maximized, say for instance, that the necessary assembly of the parcels in order to establish the minimum lot size is going to actually occur.
That is correct,
Okay.
right? So in any given circumstance here, if you look at a lot here on its own, it may or may not meet, for instance, that minimum threshold, but the presumption here is if you added that land into a site that was large enough, that's what you would end up with. But yeah, that's, again, important distinction, because you don't want to assume that you could take that particular lot if it doesn't meet the other requirements.
I guess one question I have is I'm trying to visualize in a hypothetical scenario if all of these lots are owned by the same owner and they're part of the same development, what potentially could be the maximum number of units that would be allowed there?
Yeah, so
Is
in
that on
that,
this table?
yep, so in that case, if you go to page 5 of the staff report, so top of the header, page 5, the multiple dwelling unit estimates. So what we tried to do there is, I was talking about earlier here, is look at each lot sort of on its own, but if you add that square footage up and that acreage up, what would that total be? So if you look at that total line, if this remained in R2 district, because you can only have 1 unit per lot, you're set right at 1. So that's not going to change. You have 7 units, maximum. Now, if you look at RM 32, for instance, that's the potential estimate if you can maximize it out. Now, again, because of parking constraints and others, the likelihood of hitting that unit number probably isn't there. It's probably going to be something lower than that. But absent a specific site plan to be able to analyze that, it's really difficult to estimate what that would be. That's sort of where we're a little bit handcuffed here in terms of the analysis.
And I appreciate that, and that's fair, and I think that kind of exemplifies the tough position we're in, right, of trying to envision what's here. I'll save my comments for when we get to that. Vice Chair.
Also, additional clarification. There is no obligation on part of the applicant to provide, it's often done it's been done in the past where we've seen an actual potential proposal that's associated and attached to the rezoning request. But there is no such obligation by the applicant.
That's correct. That's not an obligation, but it is something that we have seen frequently in the past where a site plan is paired with a rezoning.
Thank you. Any additional questions? All right. Seeing none, I guess is the applicant here? Do they have any?
They are.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Brian Hagan, Hagan Realty. Had to add my address in here. 927 East Grand River is our office address, although myself, along with my brothers here, my entire extended family, and so on, are also lifetime Bailey residents. And like the members of the audience here, we too have paid significant taxes for several decades as well. So, with that said, we do want to thank you guys for your consideration of our request. It's been going on now for a couple months. So, you guys have heard a lot of public comment, written communications, and so with that, I'll try to stick to the facts as best as I can. So I've got a few bullet points here. I'll just kind of read through it, but if you have questions, obviously I'd love to interact with you guys. That's a little easier for me than just reading from the script here, but we'll get that out and then we'll get to that. So we realize that there are some preconceived notions about what may or may not be built, as we've seen from the comments. We understand that, we appreciate that, but again, as Mr. Dempsey mentioned, this is just a rezoning request. And regardless of who the applicant is, we hope that you will consider the facts. And unfortunately, some of the stories that have been heard and unsubstantiated claims are off topic, but we hope, again, that you will utilize the facts and the guiding documents that you have as part of the packet. A few items that we would like you to keep in mind. The comprehensive plan, of course, and then I'll touch on why the 700 block is a good fit. Certainly some tax benefits there. And then also just touch on briefly the support that we've received from the immediate neighbors. First and foremost, the comprehensive plan. I know that I put this in writing, of course, but as you guys know, this is the guiding document that we have been referencing. And also, as you know, some of you personally, that this is a document that was vetted over 5 years by staff, committees, which some of the people that are here were actually on those committees. Thousands of hours were spent, myself other committee members, dozens of meetings, and again, members of the audience. In the end, the plan was approved by City Council and now is the framework for all future development. To say that the document is now obsolete or somehow discount its importance because of a few buildings that have been built certainly undermines the integrity of the process and the intelligence of all those who participated. Rezoning requests, just like this one, are the natural progression of that document. Buildings are supposed to be built, and that has happened, of course, but the document accounts for that. In fact, most of the buildings that have been referenced in some of the communication that have been built, student rental buildings, were actually either proposed already or approved at the time of this plan. What makes the 700 block of Grove an ideal location for increased density? Well, as the comprehensive plan says, I guess the simple answer is because the comp plan says so. But I would say additionally, except for the vacant property that you guys are aware of that's in the center of the block that's deteriorating, every single house on that block is a rental. And actually, I just added a note here that I forgot to mention that the property behind that borders it to the west is all B1, which would be an appropriate increase to back up to a business district. Among the rental houses is a large fraternity building, as well as a license for 7 rental home. These 2 uses would only be approved in RM32, yet they sit in R2. And then also, you have RM32 to the north, the bookend to the north, which is the church. And then you have Burcham, which is a major thoroughfare to the south. This would just be a natural continuation of the sorority that's further north, the church, and then, of course, these buildings. The financial benefits. What would this redevelopment, regardless of the size, mean for this area? Which I should add just a side note here off my script as well. We have no plans of developing together. I know we've said that. There's a conglomerate of ownership on this block. We have no plans of doing a 7-parcel wide development. We've said that before, but it should be restated. Besides improving the overall look and feel of the block, redevelopment of these older rentals will have a major positive financial impact. The new sorority on the corner is a perfect example. It's a great looking building, and as my notes say here, the initial increase actually is, I have an exact dollar amount, but I'll just say it's 3 times that what the previous property tax amounts were there. As far as any negative financial impact goes, I have to say any claim about any decrease in the surrounding property values as it relates to this sorority, which is the most recent development that would affect members of the 600 block, completely inaccurate. All due respect, since the sorority was built, property assessments have actually increased. They have not decreased. It should also be said, while nearly all recent developments have received some sort of tax break, all the student buildings downtown, we have never received a dime. And we will not be pursuing any tax breaks on any future development here as well. And lastly, I just want to point out, while I respect the neighbors for coming out, I actually know some of them, certainly have worked with some of them over the years, we do have support from the immediate neighbors, the most affected people on this block, which would be the church. They have written multiple letters of support. In my original letter to you guys, I went sort of into some of the actual comments that Kit Carlson had mentioned, but I'll just say that they are absolutely in favor of this rezoning, and they have stated that twice. And then Mr. Zawacki, who owns the frequently mentioned 730 Grove, he has also written a letter of support. Those 2 members, not not that anyone else isn't affected, but those two people have been the most mentioned and would be the most immediately impacted, and they are in support of this rezoning. So I guess in closing, I just want to say thank you for your time. I certainly want to offer myself, my brothers, our brother here is our builder as well. So if you have any building specific questions, I know we're not quite to that point, but if you have questions for him, but I appreciate your time and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Unfortunately, the public comment period was at the last meeting. So generally, we don't do public comment.
It's not a public comment, it's just a process. It's just a process question.
Please.
And that is, if there's a merger of properties.
You want to come up to the microphone so we can hear you?
Yeah, it was just one question. So, and maybe it's for Mr. Dempsey. If there's a merger of properties, does that merger require going back through the Planning Commission, or can the properties just merge without any process? And the reason I think that's relevant is that the letters of support from All Saints, they own one of the properties, and it would be logical that their property might be acquired by this. So it's really just a process question.
So-
Before council, right?
Yeah, so lot combinations, depending on the nature of the combination, potentially do have to go through an approval process, but it would depend on which lots and some of the criteria for that. So we'd have to know sort of specifics for that as well.
But generally, per your previous response, though, any development that we're going to see here is going to require to go through.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. That's a separate issue. Absolutely. If there's proposed redevelopment, that's definitely going to go through a process. I think the question, as I interpreted it, was more about the lot combination, where you're combining separate platted lots into a single lot.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Understanding that this is merely a zoning request before the commission this evening, and that there is no requirement that you present a site plan together with this request, you have growing opposition from a segment of neighbors. I understand that you have support as well, but it seems to be some momentum on the other side, if I'm reading the room correctly and reading the packet correctly. Can you shed any light on what it is you're planning to do? And I get you don't have to, but
Sure. Fair
here
enough.
we sit,
Yep.
trying to resolve some competing considerations about density and the impact on the neighborhood, as well as other issues, which
Sure.
is very difficult.
That's fair.
It's without any transparency whatsoever. So, what can you tell us?
A couple things, and I appreciate the question, certainly not unusual. I guess first and foremost, I would say that, again, it is just a rezoning request, and I do feel that we meet the requirements for that, first and foremost. But, and the comp plan indicates that this should be rezoned. That's number one. But with that said, I do think that we did attempt to shed some light on, what a plan could look like with our last written communication to the group. We have built townhomes, medium-sized mixture of apartments and townhomes, and those buildings were approved within the RM32 code with 0 variances. We meet every single requirement within those codes, and I guess as a side note, since we have heard about the rental market itself, I can tell you as someone that is involved in the rental market on a daily basis that there absolutely is a need, and those exact projects that I'm referencing are our most popular projects. People literally line up outside of our office 9 months in advance to rent these properties. I cannot understate that enough. These projects, there is absolutely a need, and this is coming from someone who does this for a living. This is not a study. This is our life. This is what we do. I grew up doing this. My brothers do this. I can absolutely tell you that there is a need for this project. A potential project. right there.
Still kind of
Now,
vague.
I appreciate that.
That's one word for it.
There's a packet. There's a packet
It's not
right
just
there.
me, I take
There's a packet that we have provided information in that shows what we've built that absolutely fit in the RM32 district. There's also the comprehensive plan, which shows precisely those type of buildings being built in the RM32 district. On one hand, I guess, we're being asked to say, hey, you're building this, even though we're not required to say that. I find it unfortunate, I guess, that our, I guess, uncertainty on what we're going to build is being held against us when, the community members over here are being afforded the opportunity to come in and just make accusations, speculations, and so on, and they're completely unfounded, I guess. There's just not fact in some of the things that are being said. So,
Well, my question really wasn't meant as an accusation of any sort, and I'm not necessarily opposed to redevelopment on these parcels. I'm just trying to get a feel for how to evaluate the competing considerations that are laid out and detailed in the staff report.
I can add one more note, I guess, specific to some of the comments that have been made tonight as well as in the past. One of the members that has made these comments, I guess, was on the comprehensive plan committee and fought multiple times to have the 600 block removed as an R4 district successfully. I reviewed the previous emails. In fact, I have them with me. I reviewed the city staff comments, and there was never a mention of the 700 block being removed as R4. Now, maybe it was mentioned, and someone disagreed, or maybe it wasn't mentioned. I guess either way, the comprehensive plan still shows R4 in the 700 block.
I'll just say, the business of that back and forth, as you know, that's just how public hearings go sometimes, right? And I think that's in part because, I guess for me, seeing a lot of these, it's a little bit out of order, right? Like typically, this isn't the order we see things, so we're put in an interesting spot to try to determine, A, if rezoning is appropriate, and B, with that consideration, all the possibilities that could be built on that site, some of which I don't think will ever come to fruition, but, that's the position that we're in. So I have a couple questions, but I'll give opportunity to any. No? Okay. So I know you can't say what you're going to build, but can you say potentially the focus of sort of the target market that you're going to build? Is this going to be primarily focused on students? Is this going to be focused on a broader spectrum of markets?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's a legitimate question. Obviously, we do own a lot of quote unquote student rentals. We do actually own some family rentals as well, or I don't know, young professionals, however you want to classify that. My brother built a property in Okemos. We have a property in my own neighborhood here in East Lansing. Very happy with those rentals. So, while we are certainly mindful of the fact that it's close to campus, it's also literally like across the street from Hannah Community Center, down the road from the library, the high school. We get calls on a regular basis from families, young professionals, et cetera. So I would say that certainly we build the property so anyone can rent it. Of course, we legally rent to anyone who will rent it. We understand, obviously, just kind of what comes along with being, primarily a quote-unquote student property management company, but that is not our sole focus. We own other businesses as well. So I would just say that, we are going to build, hopefully, a quality project that would fit within the zoning of RM32. We're not looking for variances and all that. And I guess the last note, and I think maybe my brother wants to say something, but I was reviewing the workforce housing proposal that just came out, and I was looking at the rents that they were asking and the requirements and things like that, and there's no question that our properties could easily, fall into those parameters. So I would say that our average rent is actually much less than what they are proposing. So I guess, I don't know if you want to say something.
Sure. Matt Hagan with Hagan Realty. I'm the brother that they don't want answering the phone when the tenants call because I'm the jerk and I just get right to the point and don't sugarcoat stuff. So Brian's doing a great job up here of giving all the details and all that kind of stuff, but it sounds like you want kind of what the deal, what the behind the scenes is. So let's just cut to the chase and say what it is. CRMC owns half the block. We own a parcel in the middle. There's a church and a sorority bookend in the other end. So there's really not a whole lot of leeway going one way or the other. We're trying to acquire 3 parcels to do a project on. CRMC owns the other parcels. We've never done any business with them. We have no intent of doing business with them. I don't think that they particularly like us a whole lot. I'm not saying we don't like them, but let's just be real. We are competitors, and they're not going to partner with us. We're not going to partner with them. So that's about as clear as we can say it. You're looking at about a 3-parcel development if we can acquire that. We don't have that. That's our attempt. That's our effort. That's what you're going to see here. We've done townhomes, apartments, very mid-sized, 3 stories. I'm the builder. I don't want to get into elevators and all kinds of stuff that I'm not comfortable building. Pretty simple. So what we've done on Duran, what we've done in Albert, you would see something most likely very similar to that in this location, whether it be 2 or 3 parcels if we can acquire that. If we can't, we got to go to the drawing board and see what we can do with what we have. So hopefully that's clear enough for you and you can make your decision on that.
I think that's helpful background personally. Remind me, which of the parcels are yours? Do you own the Burcham?
We own the one directly in the middle that's been vacant for 20 plus years.
Okay. And then I know you noted that.
743 Grove.
Okay, 743. With the exception of that, all the other rentals there, you said they're rentals. Are they all student rentals generally? Or do you know what the composition of those is?
I guess I don't know.
I mean, I assume the fraternity is students, maybe a couple 6th years, but.
I can't speak to that.
Okay, and then my last question, and then I'll. Okay, it's more of a comment. So I read your letter, and one of the things that stood out in there to me is I think you said that you're basically at full capacity with all of your rentals, right? You have no, every year you fill all. Okay, I thought I read that.
About 9 to 10 months in advance.
We have
Okay.
about 200.
The demand is definitely there.
All right, thanks for the clarification. Commissioner Williams?
Just wanted to thank you for your cut to the chase answer. That was very helpful.
It's not quite as nice when he answers the question.
Commissioner Denal?
Yeah, I actually have a question then about the White House that y'all own, the one in the middle.
Sure.
You said it's been vacant for 20 years.
On and off, yeah.
On and off?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Mostly vacant for almost 30 years. Yeah. It is almost 30 years.
Someone's keeping
yes.
track.
So the gentleman who lived there, kind of lived there on and off, Mr. Gibbs, some of you guys might know him, but he was in and out of there for 30 years, but mostly vacant, yeah.
So have y'all ever considered rehabilitating that since apparently, right, you have great demand for rentals? Have you ever considered rehabilitating that and offering that as a rental if this proposal does not pass?
Yeah,
or would you consider that, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty rough, I guess would be an understatement. Certainly like Matt mentioned, if we don't get approved, if, we can't acquire property, et cetera, all options need to be on the table, but I'd be happy to share some interior pictures of the property. It's pretty rough. Yeah, it's, I guess it looks a lot like the outside. Yeah.
Which I walked past and I thought it was really cute.
Well, if you get up close.
Again, as someone,
if you get up close, it's pretty bad.
As someone who,
yeah.
though, right, I represent a demographic in East Lansing that isn't really well represented. I'm a single woman with no family, a millennial, right?
Yep.
I don't want to say a ton of student debt, but substantial
Sure.
student debt. And I was not able to accumulate enough money to make a down payment on a house because I was getting a PhD instead. And so there are very few homes in East Lansing for people like me or for new families or young families. And I think that's one of my primary concerns. I know this is now more of a comment than a question. It started as a question. But I think that's one of my primary concerns with the project is we're removing single-family home stock. I understand that most of those are rentals currently, but we're removing the potential for single-family home stock. And so that's kind of why I asked about
Sure.
any potential future
Sure.
plans you might have for that.
For sure. Yep. And, you know, obviously we're sympathetic to that. And I think that there is certain, you know, need for that in certain areas that will probably be easier filled in different areas. You know, just, I guess, for instance, you have a license for 7 rental on the one side and a fraternity 2 doors down. I'm not saying you wouldn't want to live there, but, you know. Now, I will say, we do own properties and have tenants that fit almost the exact description that you just described. So, you know, it's not that we're not renting to people that meet that criteria, certainly.
And I don't think it's about renting, though. I think it's about building generational wealth by owning a home.
Sure.
I think that's the
Oh, yeah.
difference, right?
Sure.
That I'm trying to splice here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and it's, you know, you got licensed rentals in that area. Purchasing a licensed rental, as everybody knows up here, you know, you're paying basically per bedroom, per license. It makes it very difficult, as you're aware, to purchase a property that's already currently licensed, no question.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think we'll need a motion so we can discuss this among ourselves too. Is there any other questions? Okay, I guess before that, I'll just briefly say I appreciate you saying that you're not looking to put a substantial apartment building on all the lots there. I think that would be a very tough sell, to be honest, with us and potentially some other people in the room.
Sure. Well, I think, yeah, Matt said it a little more cut and dry than I was getting there eventually, but no, that's not the plan.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Is there a motion so we can discuss this?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Vice Chair Bowman.
I will move to recommend approval of ordinance 1520 for the rezoning from Hagan Realty LLC to amend the zoning use district map of Chapter 50 zoning of the Code of Ordinance to rezone 7 parcels totaling 1.854 acres located at 135 Burcham Drive, 709 Grove Street, 715 Grove Street, 720 Street from R2, which is medium-density, single-family residential district, to RM32, City Center Multiple-Family Residential District, for the following reasons. The land uses allowable under the new zoning district are compatible with other zoning districts and land uses in the surrounding area. The public services would not be significantly adversely impacted by future development of the property proposed for rezoning, and that the uses allowed under the proposed rezoning would equally or be better suited to the area as uses allowed under the current zoning of the land. And I have comments if there's a second.
Yep. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Hendricks. Any discussion? Vice Chair?
Yep, I've got some significant notes here because I realize that this is a difficult project to sort our way through, so if you'll excuse me, typically I wouldn't prepare nearly as much, but I've done so this time, and if you'll bear with me. I'd like to start with a couple of misconceptions. First being that this body is in any position to make any approvals or denials. This body recommends decisions to the city council, who ultimately make the final decision. But in doing so, we're charged with providing advice to the city council regarding the future land use of property within the city. And in doing so, we use the comprehensive plan as our governing document. Mr. Hagan has already mentioned that the time that was spent in developing the comprehensive plan, I was a part of that group as well, and that we don't scrap that. We were charged when we were doing the work, and Mr. Marzowski and Mr. Hagan, as he said, we're all part of that group, but that we were charged with providing some guidance to the city, and we were asked to take a 20-year view on where we would expect the city to look like in 20 years. The expectation, of course, is that we also do a periodic review of the tenets of that plan, and we've actually completed that this past year. If you recall, Ms. Van Winkle provided a couple of different thoughts about some areas of the city that might be changed based on some new development that had occurred since that plan was developed in 2018. I'm actually a member of the Bailey, a resident of the Bailey neighborhood as well, so as such I was represented by the Bailey Community Association, and I appreciate Josh's comments. the fact of the matter is that our city, like, I'm going to say nearly every city in the United States, is overwhelmingly zoned to accommodate single-family detached residential uses. That's just a fact. And that moving forward, we probably are going to have to get around our heads that home ownership is going to take a different, it's going to take a different flavor as we move forward. Probably, my children will probably never own a single-family detached house, and that's okay, right? Duplexes and quads and condos, or small condos and large, are probably going to be the way that we look at home ownership in the future. Those were the very properties that were encouraged to be built by the housing study that was commissioned by the city, and what I suspect are likely to end up on these properties, whether they're, again, whether they're, I don't know, I think you said 7 units, Matt, I'm not Mr. Hagan, but certainly going to be potentially multi-unit buildings. Like Mr. Mrzowski, I also had pictured this particular move being made someplace closer to Grand River, someplace closer to campus, where there are similar sort of separate lots, right, with different owners. But I'm very familiar with this block. In fact, it's part of my walk back from the library. When I go to the library, I generally walk along the 700 block of Grove on my way home. And the properties are adjacent to and surrounded by RM32 properties and B1 properties. And so I would submit that the comprehensive plan does support this zoning change. Appreciating that many of the petitioners had expressed their love of access to nearby amenities, the Hannah Center, the library, schools, shops, parks, the post office. Ms. Stewart actually mentioned today specifically the walkability and the convenience that provides. Again, we kind of we're blessed to be able to have that. I have it from my own house, and I walk. I was able to walk my children to school. I walk to my studio. I walk to campus. This proposal will make those same amenities and that same convenient walkability available to potentially a great many more people. Whether they're students or not, I guess remains to be seen. It will also bring an increase in density, but ultimately what it'll do is expand what I would call inclusivity in our neighborhoods. So finally, any residences that are going to build here are going to apply downward pressure on the cost of rental and potentially property ownership. With an increase in supply, there's going to be a potential decrease in price. It will make those local amenities, once again, available to more people, and depending on what's built, it may actually introduce the very form of housing stock that was recommended by the housing study, and so I intend to support this motion.
Any additional comments?
I don't.
Commissioner Denal?
I very much agree with Commissioner Bolin that cities are increasingly going to have to increase in density, right, with new home ownership situations like quads and condos. But again, those are ownership situations, and I don't believe, I can't say certainly because I don't work for Hagan Realty, but I don't believe that these are going to be ownership opportunities. They seem to me to be rental opportunities. And so in that sense, I think I disagree with you in the context of this project. You know, I already mentioned the transition of affordable single-family homes, or the lack of affordable single-family homes in the area as an issue that is very close to me and to my friends and my generation. And so I won't go much more into that. I do want to thank the notable contingent of residents who lived in the area who presented persuasive concerns about impacts to their quality of life and property values. And I appreciate the comments already from Commission about the lack of clear and transparent site plan. I'm really happy we got some clarity on that. That'll be really helpful for us, I think, as we make our decision. I do want, though, to express some concerns about the historic character of the neighborhood and of East Lansing in general. Right, I understand that we're not the Historic District Commission. That's a separate commission. But I do think that that is a big concern, I think, for me in changing the character of East Lansing drastically. And I understand it's one project. But I think that's a concern that I have even in the 3 years that I've lived here in East Lansing. And so I think those are the concerns that I would have for the project. Or not for the project, for the rezoning. Let's be specific here. The potential project.
Commissioner Williams?
I agree with Commissioner Bowman's comments and also Commissioner Donald's, which I think maybe highlights that this is a difficult question. I mean, what we're being asked to do this evening is to move to council with a recommendation of approval, a rezoning of the entire 7 parcels. I think the density that's allowable under the proposed zoning district exceeds that which was intended under the master plan when you look at the overall site. And that's what we're being asked to do, rezone the overall site. I think there is significant opposition to this. I think, though, when you talk about what it is you're actually talking about building, I probably would support that. I think it would meet a need in the city. I just think it's maybe a step too far and a bit premature.
Thank you. Any comments? All right. I don't know why I did a deep dive on this, but I did. So just, and you guys stole my thunder on a lot of things. So anyways, the master plan, the 2018 master plan, I think it's disingenuous to say that that's invalid. Again, I think a lot of work went into that. I came in on the tail end of that on the commission. Staff did tremendous amount of work on that. Went through council. There was a ton of public comment. It was a public process. You know, maybe not a mega building, which I hear is not going to be built there, but this recommendation ultimately aligns with the master plan. I don't think it would go beyond that if there's separate developments put there. There was also the housing strategic plan in 2021. There was land use recommendations in there and with that. This aligns with that as well. You know, when you boil this down, we're talking about removing what is now largely student housing, a large fraternity house, a medium-sized apartment building. Something that was said last week did resonate with me a lot, or last meeting resonated with me a lot. I think really when you look at Burcham and you look at Grove, those are kind of two separate things. I think what's appropriate for the Burcham lots is potentially maybe not appropriate for the Grove lots. But you know, really you're replacing what's there now, which we heard a lot of concerns about the condition of a lot of those with an undetermined property that could be beneficial to the community. But that's the position we're in, to look at a rezoning change and not a specific proposal. We already talked about process. Rezoning doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't guarantee that they have the green light to build whatever project they want there. Whatever they come forward with, there's going to be plenty of public comment period, plenty of opportunities to weigh in. There's the commission process, there's staff review, there's council. And this is where I did a deep dive too on housing needs. So I think we all know there's a national issue right now with the lack of housing. There's a state issue with lack of housing. I know in the governor's budget, there's an item in there for a population study. I believe a key component of that will be housing and studying housing. And then the city of East Lansing actually had this question as well. So they said, let's go out and do a housing study. So I actually went through and read that housing study, and I think a lot of the takeaways from that housing study are just inaccurate. One of the things it stated was that East Lansing is 5% underbuilt for attached housing, such as row houses. That East Lansing has a very low vacancy rate at 6%, which is far below 8%, which is considered a healthy market. And that the ultimate takeaway was that people can't find homes here, and they end up settling, or apartments, and they end up settling in nearby municipalities. We ultimately have a mismatch of housing types. Ultimately, one of the things that they wanted to see was more townhomes being built, which is what I hope would be built on this site ultimately. And they also stated that a good target for the community would be corner sites that are close to amenities. That's specifically cited on page 11 of the housing plan, which I think sounds familiar to some of us in this room. The vice chair already talked about a lot of the amenities that are nearby. I live nearby. I could walk to this site very easily. I love living in that area and having my family with me, and we can walk to just about everything. You know, and a lot of people that came before us talked about how great those things are, and I would like more people to be able to experience those things. Maybe not more students, but more people. And like I said, the condition I think would improve if there's something that was put there. And then on the note of students, I thought to myself, what impact have we seen on students the last few years? So in 2022, MSU had over 50,000 K enrollment, which was a new milestone for them. They had the largest freshman class ever at 11,000. And then another thing that the housing study said is that East Lansing loses over 10,000 students to surrounding cities. So Bath, Meridian, students want to live in East Lansing. They can't find somewhere to live in East Lansing, and they ultimately relocate to surrounding municipalities when the housing stock fills up. We already talked about in Hagan's letter to the commission how they're at full occupancy. And I don't think we should necessarily discriminate against students, but I don't think that that should be really the target demographic here. I think we could look a little bit broader than that and try to bring in some of the folks that were noted by the housing study as people that are looking to get in this community that could benefit from it. And really that leads me to, go figure townhouses, which I think we could focus on a smart investment in these sites, focusing on appropriate character, appropriate size for the community, and style that would fit. Like the 2.5-story townhomes. You already talked about affordability and the market impacts that could happen there. So where does that leave us as a planning commission? So, I think we could study the design impacts of whatever is going to potentially be put there. The housing study noted specific housing types that students don't necessarily gravitate to, so I think that's something we could look at. Bring in young families, professionals, and that type of market, a style that fits the area. I even read about something called, you probably know about this, the defensible space theory by Oscar Newman. He talked about how when you give people a yard and townhomes and a sense of space, it does things like creates a sense of belonging and reduces crime and has a lot of positive impacts on a community. So I think that's what we should do, focus on the spectrum of lifestyles and markets. On to some of the concerns that were brought up. I really tried to look into those. I spoke about crime and the impact of townhomes there. We're possibly looking at getting rid of a fraternity house, so there's potentially a noise impact you could see getting rid of that. Property values, that was brought up earlier. I think with investment in that block, I think you'll see improvement. A lot of questions about traffic. I think this would necessitate a new traffic study if there was going to be any sort of development there. I don't know what kind of size would trigger the need for a traffic study, but that's certainly something that we could look at. But generally speaking, density does tend to alleviate traffic. I know this development is located near some CATA bus lines too, which could be impactful. Timing, I think this is years away. I think we're taking a future outlook here of what should be on this site decades from now. It sounds like they don't even have a plan in mind of what they want to develop. But I think potentially if you don't allow rezoning or you deny a building, if it does get rezoned and comes up, I don't know what kind of investment you'll see there in the future. So that's the gamble I think we would be taking. And then just affordability, supply and demand. So ultimately, I'm leaning towards trying to see what could be proposed for this site before I say no. I have no idea what they want to put there. I have some general thoughts, and I know the public has some thoughts. But I just want to see what the plan is. I'm not ready to just say no right now at this point. I want to see what the plan is. Not that we even make the decision. We refer it to council to make the decision, like you said. But ideally, I would like to see, like I said, some row houses that fit the character of the community, that target a broader market. But ultimately, with that in mind, look at what you'd be losing. I think the properties that are there, I think a lot of people would think could be improved by a new development that's appropriate for that area, and hopefully with comments and consideration from the public and the neighbors that live nearby. But anyways, I put a lot of thought into this, and that's where I landed. I'm supportive of making a zoning change. I have a lot of reservations about potentially what could get put there, and that's the weird position that we're in. So those are my comments. I don't know if anybody has comments to my comments, but I'll gladly take them.
I think
Commissioner Denault?
I think the comment that I would have is I would be very interested in seeing some of these parcels redeveloped, but I think that's the tricky position that we're in right now is we're being asked to upzone 7 parcels. I think I would be much more inclined to support the proposal for upzoning if it was brought to us in a more piecemeal fashion. And like, I would be very interested in the parcel that's on Burcham, in seeing that being, having increased density. I would be interested to see, right, the projects that the proposers would potentially build on the parcels that they own. And so I find that I am in agreement with you in this sort of yes and no, in support of and not in support of. Because everything you're saying about affordability and density, I agree with. And I would like to see that, but maybe not here, and maybe in more of a piecemeal fashion. The urbanist in me is dying right now saying that.
I was going to say, I think I recall you moving from a somewhat large Midwestern city, so.
Somewhat large.
Yeah. All right, any additional comments? Seeing none, I believe a vote is in order. Mr. Dempsey, could you do a roll call vote on this one?
Yes. Williams.
No.
Sullivan.
Yes.
Hendricks.
Yes.
Denault.
No.
Boyd.
No.
Bowman.
Yes.
So we have 3 yes and 3 no's, so the motion fails.
What? Oh, well, I think this is going to go to, as the vice chair just reminded me, this is going to go to council regardless, so they're going to have their say in it as well. So I'm sure they look forward to seeing you all. All right. On to item number 8, new business, 8.1, I believe a presentation on a mass timber ordinance. Mr. Dempsey, will you lead us off?
Yes. To start this off, I just want to give you a little bit of context. So we were approached by, we being the city, was approached by Midwest Strategy Group about a mass timber ordinance. This is something that they'll talk about this evening in terms of their sort of motivation to do this. But typically, when we have zoning ordinance changes that are text changes to our requirements, they're often, or most typically, driven by staff. It might be an issue that we see that the Planning Commission is interested in, or staff is recognized for a change, so council will typically introduce a proposed change and bring it forward. Because this is from an external group, we took a little bit different approach here. We're having Midwest Strategy Group present to the Planning Commission. They presented to the Downtown Development Authority last week because this applies to the core DDA district, and then they'll present to the Commission on the Environment in July. Afterwards, what we'll do is sort of determine how we might want to proceed. So we're not looking for any decisions, of course. This is not a formal review of the ordinance, but it's an informal discussion to hear the motivation behind it, to hear their reasons for it, and then to talk a little bit about the zoning implications that are connected with it. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to them to provide their presentation, and then I can also answer questions with respect to the zoning requirements.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, Chair Sullivan and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Adam Wright with Midwest Strategy Group, and we're a multi-client lobby firm in Lansing that represents developers, local governments, and environmental organizations throughout the state of Michigan. Our goal is to effectively represent our clients by creating strategic economic development policies that encourage growth in communities. Next slide when she gets there. East Lansing has a wonderful opportunity to be a statewide leader and take a step in the right direction in the battle against climate change. Embracing policies and ordinances that encourage and entice green and sustainable development is critical for municipalities across Michigan, and we think there's no better place to go green than right here in East Lansing. Our proposal, as outlined in the documents that we provided to you, will encourage the use of mass timber by making it a use by right in the downtown B3 zoning district, and allow occupancy and height to offset the higher initial construction cost. The proposal also provides a definition for mass timber that is in line with the 2021 International Building Code. Supporting this proposal will provide another tool to entice sustainable and green development in East Lansing. The type of development our proposal encourages will attract new residents and visitors who will in turn bring added revenue to local retailers and restaurants and additional tax base to the local economy. After my introductory remarks, you will hear from Sandra Lupien, the Director of Mass Timber at Michigan State University, who will provide you with a background on mass timber and its benefits to the environment and to communities. Following Sandra, you will hear from George Berghorn, who's an Assistant Professor of Construction Management and Research Director at Mass Timber at MSU, who will speak to you regarding hurdles to constructing mass timber buildings and why these proposed changes are important. Next slide. We've also provided you with several letters of support from a wide range of individuals and organizations in support of mass timber and its use in construction projects in Michigan. These letters demonstrate that the benefits of mass timber are undeniable and that the industry is on the rise in Michigan. And as you'll see in the packets that we provided, we have the following letters of support for mass timber. So some of your local elected officials in Senator Sam Singh, Representative Julie Brixey, Representative Penelope Cernoglu, Mass Timber MSU, the Nature Conservancy, Michigan Environmental Council, Michigan Farm Bureau, and the Michigan Forest Biomaterials Institute. I'm grateful to you, Mr. Chair, and to commission members for having us here tonight. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to work together with everyone here in the city of East Lansing to take this first important step in being a leader for all communities here in Michigan. Now I'd like to invite Sandra Lupien to come up and talk to you about the benefits of mass timber.
I'm going to move the speaker cards down here. Thanks, Adam. Good evening, commissioners. So nice to see you, and thanks for inviting us to speak with you about this mass timber idea. I'm Sandra Lupien. I'm the Director of Mass Timber at MSU at Michigan State University. Mass timber is, next slide. I'm so used to running my own. Mass timber, I like to level set on what the definition of mass timber is before I start any presentation. I'm talking about a category of, or an umbrella term for a variety of very large engineered wood building construction materials that you can use to build large buildings. So it's a way of using wood in ways we haven't been able to use wood before in structural and decorative applications, and doing so provides a number of benefits that I'm going to describe to you. Next slide, please. Worth noting, and perhaps you've visited it, MSU has the state's first major mass timber building on our campus, the STEM Teaching and Learning Facility right next to Spartan Stadium. I know you've been there. Has anyone else been in the building? Yeah, I'd be happy to give you a tour of it anytime. It's an amazing experience to be in the building. It's actually a renovated project. It took the former Shaw Lane coal-fired power plant and turned it into wet labs and dry labs for STEM education for basically mostly freshmen and sophomores coming through those core courses. And we decided to incorporate this sustainable building material to create this, a lot of the structural system of the building. So our program, next slide please, Mass Timber at MSU, and you can do 2 clicks. Mass Timber at MSU is a collaboration across the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources at MSU, across the Department of Forestry, the School of Planning, Design and Construction, and Extension. And it's really our role to help advance sustainable mass timber construction and manufacture in Michigan and the surrounding Great Lakes region. And we do that by mobilizing the things that MSU does really well: education, research, outreach, communications, as well as helping to think about policies to advance those goals. We work in very close collaboration, including funding support from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and we also work in partnership with MEDC. So these agencies are very interested in particular in bringing mass timber manufacture to Michigan. And in order to do that, you probably want to build more mass timber buildings. So we work with them in collaboration on those goals. Next slide, please. Great. So now I'm going to just talk about a few key types of mass timber. And the types of mass timber I'm going to discuss are those you can see in the STEM teaching and learning facility across the street. Next slide. Starting with glue laminated timber columns and beams. Glue lam is a short way of saying glue laminated timber. Glue lam, typically in the shape of columns and beams like you see there. It's composed of layers of dimensional lumber, so like 2x4s or 1x4s or 2x6s, placed again in layers next to each other, with each layer going in the same direction as the one next to it. There's adhesive between each layer, and then these gigantic pieces of laminated wood are placed in a hydraulic press to press out a very large amount of air so that you have something that's very, very tight, airtight, and very, very strong. And imagine using this in place of a steel I-beam or a steel column. So it's that scale, large. Next one, please. The second type of mass timber that you see in the STEM teaching and learning facility is called cross-laminated timber panels. And these images show two different views of cross-laminated timber. One is in these walls in the stair tower of our STEM teaching and learning facility. That's the one on the right. And then the other picture is a cross-section, basically, of mass timber. So you can, or the cross-laminated timber, or CLT. So you can actually see how it works. So like with glue laminated timber, the composition is layers of dimensional lumber. However, unlike glue laminated timber, each layer is in the opposite direction of the layer next to it, right? There's still adhesive, and then there's the hydraulic pressing process. But the idea with the crossing is to make a very, very strong member, structural member, that is strong both to the force of gravity as well as to lateral resistance. So you've got something that's strong in two directions. And this is the type of mass timber that allows us to really start building very large buildings with wood. And these panels are huge. The panels that you see on the right side there, that's the third floor of our stair tower, and you can see a seam. Do you see that little seam there? So the panel below it goes all the way down to the first floor, so it's 3.5 stories high. It's a very, very large panel. So just thinking about the scale. Next slide. There's many other types of mass timber, but these are the two that we're seeing most commonly used, and certainly the ones that people are most excited about. And now we're going to talk about why people are excited about mass timber. So there's benefits both in terms of building construction, for forests, climate, and sustainability, as well as related to jobs and the economy. So we're just going to talk about those three buckets. So in terms of construction, next slide, please. Mass timber is a high-performance material, as I've already begun to indicate. So it has all of these wonderful properties that I mentioned, but you have to really think about this. The mass timber is lighter weight and stronger than many of the materials we commonly use in large buildings, right? So it has a really great strength to weight ratio, which might mean, for example, you can use fewer materials or less materials in the foundation of your building because you're not holding as much weight. That's a benefit. It can work well to comprise the entire structural system of your building, so you can build a fully mass timber building. More likely, you're probably going to build a hybrid building using mass timber in combination with materials that are more familiar, like steel and concrete. And our STEM facility is an example of that hybrid structure, so you'll see that when you come there. So that means we can continue to use the materials that we know how to use in combination with this newer, more sustainable material, really kind of thinking about the best material for the particular application. Mass timber, if you're in an earthquake-prone zone, which we're not, does perform well in seismic testing, but people often ask anyway. And then the important thing to really think about with mass timber, and this is the question people always ask, is about its fire performance. Mass timber is highly fire resistant, counterintuitive perhaps because it's wood. And the reason that it's highly fire resistant is best described and explained using an analogy. So, you know, when you build a campfire, maybe you go camping sometimes, you put a log in your fire, you've split the log, it burns, you know, you can have a warm fire, you can make your s'mores. But if you put a whole log in your campfire without splitting it, what happens? it doesn't burn. It chars on the outside, the fire puts itself out, and the whole interior of the log is just sitting there dry and cold, and you're cold and you're mad because you're hungry. So mass timber behaves more like that unsplit log. And so if you look at the photo on the bottom right, you can see an example of a fire test of that glue laminated timber member. So the member on the left, that's before, probably being in a 2-hour fire test. The one on the right is after a 2-hour fire test, and you can see there how the fire charred through the exterior layers of that mass timber column or beam, leaving the structural layers inside intact. And that's a really powerful property, because what you would expect then in a really hot fire is that you would have plenty of time for people to get out of the building, so you've got the egress that you want, but your structural system remains intact. It's not going to melt. So that's an exciting property of mass timber. Next slide, please. I'm actually going to defer on this one to my colleague George, who's going to talk a little bit more about the construction benefits as it relates to actual efficiency on the site, and how the proposal that is on the table that we're describing is maybe going to help offset some of that. Jobs in the economy, next slide, please. Michigan is a highly forested state with a forestry economy that's maybe not as robust as it once was. Building with mass timber creates demand for manufacturing mass timber in our state, which helps create demand for sustainably harvested and grown Michigan wood, which can create new sources of revenue for forest land owners to maintain the health and resilience of our forests. It can help create new jobs in mass timber manufacture and fabrication, and it can create new types of construction jobs. And our friends with the carpenters know that, and that's why they've launched a training program for mass timber construction specifically for their apprentices and for their signed organizations. So that is an extremely exciting opportunity. And also it can help just generally revitalize those employment sectors like forestry, like timber, milling and kilning, and even logging, right? These industries that in rural communities could use a boost. Next slide, please. And finally, building with mass timber makes beautiful buildings, right? If you go into a building with lots of exposed wood, you're probably going to have a positive feeling. This is actually studied. There's a term for it. The term is biophilia. That means the benefits of bringing nature indoors and how humans respond to natural materials. We find that they might be more productive if they're working in a mass timber building. They might demonstrate better mental health or just a general positive feeling of well-being if they live in a mass timber building. And that's very important. And plus, architects love designing with it. It's just a lot of fun to use. Next slide, please. Now, this is the part of the mass timber kind of value proposition that's really driving its uptake across the country and across the world right now. And that has to do with forests, carbon, and sustainability. It's hard to describe this in a nutshell because forests are very complex. But how I want to say it is this. We all know how photosynthesis works. Trees, when they're growing in the forest, absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They convert it and store it as carbon in their trunks and roots and their branches. That is an extremely important ecosystem function. We cannot live on the earth without that happening, right? We need forests to do that. That means we need to keep forests as forests. One way that we keep forests as forests, in addition to valuing them for that ecosystem service and for cleaning the air and cleaning the water and providing wildlife habitat, is also valuing them for the wood that they provide us to build things. We need wood to build our communities. We know that. We've been using wood. We also know how to responsibly grow wood, harvest wood, manage forests, and plan for the sustainability of forests and even plant more trees to add more forests to our environments. And valuing that wood product is one way of financing that activity and making it happen. So that's really important to note and sometimes counterintuitive. Wood is 50% carbon, so that's storage of carbon. When you use wood products in your building or anywhere, wood, doors, we see that, that's 50% carbon. The carbon that tree is storing, or that tree was storing, is now locked up in that wood, not being emitted into the atmosphere, which would happen if it burned in the forest or if the tree died. So we're actually extending the carbon benefits of trees by building buildings with wood. Finally, wood is a renewable resource. And when you make mass timber, you generally are emitting significantly fewer emissions to source the wood, to make the product and to transport the product to your building site than is the case with other materials that we commonly use in large buildings. So it's a forest, carbon, and sustainability win. I just want to give you some numbers. So I was talking about that carbon storage property. So our STEM facility on the MSU campus has 3,000 cubic meters of mass timber in it. That stores more than 1,000, or at least 1,856 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. Who cares what that means? What does that number mean to anybody? It means the equivalent of not driving the average car, 4.7 million miles, or not burning 2 million pounds of coal. So the MSU STEM facility is not saving the world with its carbon storage, but if we're building more and more buildings like this, then we're really mobilizing the aggregate impact of that carbon storage property. Really important to greening our built environments. Next slide, please. Mass timber is not really a niche product. Mass timber demand is growing across the United States and across the world. Between 2018 and 2022, at this time last year, demand for mass timber increased more than 3 times all across the country. And it's just continuing to increase. We're expecting demand for mass timber to at least double every 2 years into the mid-2030s and beyond. And in Michigan, demand is increasing as well. Next slide, please. And you can double. Thanks. We're seeing all types of mass timber buildings being planned, developed, and even built right now. I'm not going to read off that list, but including affordable housing and multifamily housing, the types of buildings that we were just discussing badly needing in Michigan. And next. And they're not just in one part of the state. I had thought maybe we'll see mass timber demand growing in Detroit or in some of the larger cities. That's not true. One more, please. It's all over the state. Cities, suburbs, rural communities, Lower Peninsula, Upper Peninsula, everywhere. There are mass timber projects either in development, under construction, or where they're really exploring it as a serious option that the building owner really, really wants. So we're going to see more of these. I think we're going to have 6 or 7 mass timber projects under construction during the next year across the state. And hopefully we'll see some more on campus pretty soon too. We're working on it. Next, please. And then finally, important to note that mass timber is showing up in policy in Michigan. So a few examples of that I just want to share. First of all, the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. The governor signed it on Earth Day in 2022. This is the state's roadmap to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Mass timber is mentioned 3 times in that plan as a tool for achieving that goal. And so I think that's a very important sign that we want mass timber in Michigan. We're seeing some local actions. The city of Lansing included mass timber in its sustainability action plan for the city. The Ann Arbor Public School District is specifying mass timber in RFPs for bond-funded school projects that are rolling out already and will be rolling out over the next 15, 20 years. Building codes, Adam mentioned. Important to note, the state of Michigan is currently working on a draft Michigan 2021 building code. This draft will include the most up-to-date mass timber elements of the 2021 International Building Code, and those elements provide the greatest available clarity and permission to build with mass timber. It's going to allow us to build taller mass timber buildings than what's currently in the code, and it just provides clearer guidance about how to do that in the best possible way. So we're very excited to see that draft rolling out from the Bureau of Construction Codes very soon, and they're hoping to have that passed, they tell me, by the end of this year. So we can really feel comfortable knowing that we're going to have that in our code very, very soon. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's the end of my remarks, but this is how to contact me if you want to follow up with any questions about mass timber, or in particular, if you'd like to come and see our STEM teaching and learning facility and understand what it's like to be in a mass timber building. But I want to thank you for your attention and then pass the mic to my colleague, Dr. George Berghorn. Thank you.
All righty, thanks, Sandra. You can advance the slide, please. One more, please. Like Sandra, I'm used to doing my own work on advancing slides, so it's a little strange. So one of the things that comes up when you hear about mass timber, and it comes up frequently, in fact, came up numerous times in discussion in my circle last week, is, but it's more expensive. Why are we doing this if it's more expensive? And construction costs are a funny thing. You know, when someone says something is more expensive in terms of a building, my question is always, was it the material? Was it the construction cost? Was it the full development cost? What is it when we say it's more expensive? I need to know apples and apples so I can make the comparison. So there's some places where cost can really be your friend or can be your enemy in mass timber projects. And I broke them into really just three categories: the planning phase of construction and development, material considerations, and construction. So one of the things that most successful mass timber projects realize is that the planning phase of the work, the pre-construction, all of the things that go into the getting the building out of the ground, so the not exciting stuff that, you know, nobody really is talking about as much. And I see Mr. Bowman laughing at me. I exclude design from this, sir. Design is very exciting, so I exclude that in the not exciting part. But all of those other planning processes do often take longer in mass timber building projects. And I would say that in successful projects, they certainly take longer because there is a considerably greater amount of pre-planning that has to happen. There's a greater amount of team integration that has to happen because this is a manufactured product. And as you might imagine, when you're manufacturing a product that uses natural raw materials instead of something like steel or concrete, generally speaking, inorganics, you don't always get the same repeated product over and over and over again when you're utilizing a natural material. So bringing a manufacturer on board to a design and construction team is something that's critical, not something we typically think of when we're talking about steel and concrete buildings. So that planning process is longer, which may mean more expensive, right? Everything in construction, you can sort of think of time and cost as graphs that track with one another. Just how far apart they are is the question. So as those timelines move up, cost moves up. So the question becomes, if we invest more in a planning process, do we save more somewhere else later in the process? And I'm here to tell you, it's probably not in the material side of this. The material, typically speaking, on a unit per unit volume is more expensive than concrete or steel. So you're saying, why is this guy standing in front of us telling us, advocating for this material, and he's telling us planning horizons are longer, and he did the whole thing with his hands. Longer means more expensive, and now the material's more expensive. This guy's got a really sick sense of humor in terms of trying to convince us. It's when you get to construction that things change, and things have the potential to change drastically. As Sandra was mentioning, those large panels that were in our stair tower at the MSU, at the STEM building at MSU, those large panels that you see on the right-hand side, wall panels at Brock Commons, which is a University of British Columbia dormitory up in Vancouver, BC. These large panels mean that construction happens much quicker, or at least has the potential to happen much quicker. Wood, and I want to say this carefully, Tim Rozowski left. He's a former professor of mine, so maybe I don't have to be quite as careful. He won't throw something at me if I say this wrong, but wood on a per weight basis is stronger than steel. So if I take a piece of wood and a piece of steel that weigh the same, that piece of wood may be stronger than that piece of steel. So this is, don't walk away and say Berghorn told me that wood is stronger than steel. You're not allowed to say that. On a per weight basis, wood tends to be stronger than steel, and especially in these engineered assemblies, that happens to be the case. So what you end up with is a column or a beam that performs the same way as its steel or concrete cousin, but it weighs less. And less weight to a construction person is a pretty good thing, because it means maybe we can use a smaller crane. It means we can use a smaller crew to put these pieces up. We don't need as many people physically handling the material, which, let's face it, in the last 7-8 years, the construction workforce problem post downturn has not gotten any better. So finding ways to build with constrained workforces is something that I think a lot of people are very interested in and very excited about. So those higher costs in planning and material selection phases do have the potential to be offset during construction. And we saw that with the STEM building at MSU. As the crews actually got more adept at installing the mass timber, their productivity ramped up, and they just did a little back of the envelope calculation and said, you know, if our productivities on day one were like our productivities on day whatever, the end, we could have stood to save maybe a couple of months in this project. And remember, time and cost track. So if I can save 2 months, I can save some money on a project. If I'm an owner of a building, I can get tenants in quicker, right? That's powerful if I'm in that space. If I'm building a parking garage, and yes, there are mass timber parking garages out west, I can get cars parked in there and start getting meter revenue or monthly pass revenue that much quicker. You can advance, please. One of the things that some of this cost benefit is contingent upon, though, is getting to this 2021 International Building Code. Code certainly plays a role in the relative expense, particularly of novel building materials or of newly in-use building materials. So what you see on the left, you see 4A, 4B, 4C. These are new building types that are allowable under the 2021 International Building Code. 4HT is kind of what's in the code now, just called Type 4. It gets renamed in 2021, but it's good old Type 4 from 2015 and 2018. And there's a height limit on that. And you can see that height limit there. You've got a 6-story, 85-foot height limit. As we adopt 2021, we can now start to use more mass timber in more applications, and we can go higher. And there's some power in being able to go higher with buildings. As we start to put more gross floor area on as we go up, we actually can see some reduced costs on a per square foot basis. There's a tipping point there, but as we go higher, just want to say this again, as we go higher on a per square foot basis, we can typically see lower costs per square foot, economy of scale. That economy of scale is really not possible under the 2015, which is our current code in Michigan. Well, but we can do an engineering design review. Sure, but remember those higher planning costs. Now we go back there. Every time we do an engineering design review, we add more direct cost and we add more time, and y'all can pass my quiz. If we add time, we add cost, right? So having ordinances and code changed to allow more flexibility in the deployment of mass timber are critical to getting to that cost performance. So this use by right that's in front of you today is an example of something that brings in the potential to have higher performance on the cost side as opposed to where things stand today. And then if we go to the last slide, I'll wrap up my homily or soliloquy or whatever it is I'm doing with you guys this evening and just say that these are some examples of some buildings that have been built. The two top rows have been built already. The bottom was a case study, a hypothetical, a building that wasn't built. And you just get the sense, 5-story building, 4-story building, 12-story building, you get the gross floor area of the buildings, and then the time to erect the structure in mass timber. And I don't have a comparison here because you might be saying, well, if you're doing steel or concrete, how long does it take to put up a 5-story or a 4-story structure if you're doing steel or concrete? The fact that you're getting 5 stories up in 12 weeks, 4 stories in 16, and the reason those 4 stories took a little bit longer at 16, every wall and floor for that Candlewood Suites was made of CLT. There wasn't a lick of concrete or steel really in that building. And the CLT was a little bit heavier because it's on a military base and it had to meet DoD blast resistance guidelines, which, by the way, I don't think Sandra mentioned this, CLT has been proven to be blast resistant. And so the Department of Defense is building blast resistant CLT buildings as well. So that's why you get a little bit longer for the 4-story building. That's a little bit smaller than that 5-story. So some of that time performance is absolutely incredible. And so what I hear from people when they want to build a mass timber building, they say, I want to build my 150,000 square feet and I want to get the structure up in 12 weeks. Just how do we do that? How do we get there? How do we make that happen? Again, it's a good planning process. It's a strong material design and selection process led by an experienced architect and an experienced engineer. There's some rules of thumb in terms of how much wood per square foot of building area we should be using to make these buildings economically feasible, kind of a do not exceed 0.75 cubic feet of wood per square foot of floor area, if you're really interested in the number. There's some fire resistance rating. Sorry. Look, you get a guy with a PhD, you have to give me a few minutes to like geek out about a few things. Yeah, sorry.
I didn't write down fast enough, yeah.
So, again, people want that performance, but the answer is to get to that performance, good planning, good material selection, good enabling codes and ordinances that don't put more burden back on the planning and material selection side. That's how you get to that. And then if you click one more time, my final caveat is that experience of the team and early design decisions play a big role in that as well. And so while those things don't have as much to do with the ordinance changes in front of you tonight, I would argue that the more projects we get in a county, in a metro, in a state, the greater the chance we have of having an experienced workforce on the design side and on the construction side that can put these buildings into play, meaning economic benefit for sort of everyone throughout that value chain. So thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions that you'll have.
Oh, okay. I have questions just about the mass timber in general. So, does anybody else have any questions?
Hello.
So, an LVL beam would be classified as a mass timber thing, right? Okay.
Yes.
So, if you're going to tear down a wall in a house and put up a new LVL header, it's kind of building. I know the definition is much broader than that. And I haven't read the full definition in the building code, but that's good to know. Is it easier to cut than steel? Is that what leads to some of the time savings? Okay.
So when you build a mass timber project, it's typically a prefabricated kit of parts, right? I guess you said that. But it comes to your site ready to erect, essentially. Everything has been pre-cut to the correct length. Holes have been pre-drilled for connectors. Openings for doors and windows have been cut out exactly where they need to go. And your manufacturer works with your construction team to make sure that everything arrives at the right time to go up. So yes, it is. You're cutting less. And one thing that we both failed to mention was that building with mass timber is significantly quieter than building with other materials. So imagine the value of that in a downtown business district. I mean, I remember sitting, or actually not sitting, I wanted to go to the Black Cat Bistro and have dinner on the patio when the building nearby was under construction, and I was kind of like, no. Too loud. But if it was a mass timber building, you could expect it to be quieter. And of course, the length of the disruption would likely be shorter.
So very good explanations about the positives. Is there any downsides to doing it? Is there any impact with water, moisture, pests? What is the lifespan of it? Is it the same as steel? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so lifespan, like anything that's new, I remember when LED light bulbs first came out and they said 10 years, and I was, my grandfather was sort of one of these, you got to show me kind of guys. He was a carpenter, and he said, how do they know that they would last for 10 years? They've only been on the market for 6 months. Yeah, okay, good point, Grandpa. So the Bullitt Center in Washington State was built to have a 250-year lifespan. It's a mass timber structure. Our building on campus was built with a 100-year lifespan in mind. I mean, again, until we see these things and how they age and how they move, it's really hard to put a decimal on that number. But these are durable buildings. These materials are durable. The U.S. Forest Service has their national laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin. They dismantled their original laboratory building that was built in the 30s. They dismantled it somewhere around 2010, 2011. Big glulam arches and trusses in that building. So when they dismantled the building, they were sort of waiting to see what were these glulams going to look like after 80 years of service or 75 years of service. 1/10 of an inch deflection maximum on any of the beams. So over those 75 years of being loaded, the most they sort of moved out of their original alignment was 1/10 of an inch. And the only place where they had problems were where there was water intrusion, where there should not have been water intrusion. There was a leak in a roof, and so they had a little bit of rot in the beam. Now, that's handled during construction. There's coatings that are put on so that they're a little more water repellent during construction. There's contractual ways to make sure that when you're putting horizontal elements in, somebody has it in their scope of work to squeegee those floor plates off after a rainfall or a snow. event, there are a raft of coatings that are being developed to do all manner of protection, UV, moisture. And then insects, really, not as much of an issue here, but Clemson's doing some work. So I've talked to the Clemson folks, and they said, it's real simple. It's like any other wood construction. If you want it to be termite resistant, don't bring the wood all the way down to the ground level, right? Have the wood stand off from the ground on some steel or concrete and then move up from there. And that's, even if you guys come to the STEM building, you'll see we built the wood on the ground floor sitting on steel anchor plates in the ground. So the wood is never touching the ground directly.
When they come to the STEM.
When.
You mentioned it's lighter too, so I imagine some of the cost savings come with the shipping cost reductions then too, right? And then I guess a follow-up to that would be, is some of this coming from Michigan now? I have to imagine some of it is, right? Okay, so that's another potential cost reduction that cities could see, is if that starts to get harvested, is that the correct?
Yeah.
Here, yeah.
Yeah, sourced and manufactured
Yeah.
here in Michigan. Yeah, not yet. Again, that's a key goal of some of the state agencies we're partnering with, as well as, and then therefore of ours, to create the conditions that would cause a manufacturer to want to make mass timber here using Michigan wood and Michigan workers to do that. One of the things that we're doing right now to help create those conditions is a supply chain analysis for mass timber manufacture here, as well as a demand survey in eight Great Lakes states to really understand, if you were going to manufacture mass timber here, what would you make? How much of it would you make? Where would you locate? Who would buy it? How much would they buy, right? So we're very eager to have that happen, and I think every day we're getting a little bit closer, I think, but there's, barriers that need to be addressed.
I imagine there's, broad types, but is there a specific type of wood that's best served? Is it pine, cedar, oak?
All mass timber materials currently approved for use, and that is to say certified by the bodies that certify such products, are made of softwood species. So yeah, spruce pine fir, Douglas fir, southern yellow pine are the most common ones. The certifications are going to be adding more species all the time as there's interest in using more materials. I believe we're going to have some red pine mass timber probably going into a Michigan building pretty soon, actually. But pretty soon we'll be able to talk about that publicly. But there's also hardwood mass timbers in other countries, like in the UK, there's hardwood mass timbers in Australia, and Michigan Tech is working on developing hardwood mass timbers using Michigan red maple. So lots of opportunities for new types of materials, just a matter of taking them through the R&D process and then getting them certified by the appropriate bodies and moving them to market.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? You have one about the ordinance. Commissioner Denault?
So we've talked a lot about, or we've heard a lot about the benefits of construction with mass timber. I'm wondering, at the facilities that process and manufacture mass timber products, are there any negative environmental impacts or any negative site impacts, like odors or noise or anything like that?
So it's a pretty standard, pretty common engineered wood products manufacturing process. So a lot like an OSB mill or a veneer mill for plywood. So very similar to that. The plants, we toured a few of them in Finland recently. For the output, they're remarkably quiet. The main waste products that are generated are sawdust from cutting and trimming. And I think one of the things that the wood products industry in Michigan has done very well over the years is find uses for those offcuts, right? They do a lot of biomass burning for heat in the northern lower and the UP in those mills. They use it to power their kilns to dry their wood. So they tend to be pretty circular, at least in terms of the wood waste. There's always questions about resins, adhesives, because they're fossil fuel based, of course. But I'm happy to tell you that there's work being done at MSU right now that's in pre-commercialization stage to use wood byproducts, so byproducts of biomass, lignin, which is basically 50% of the structure of wood, to make those same chemicals that would go into making adhesives, foams, and coatings. So a much lower carbon burden. You're not talking about any sort of fossil fuel, so no formaldehyde, no urea, those kind of things. And the adhesives perform better than the formaldehyde and urea-based adhesives, and they have a much better environmental footprint. The other thing that I can tell you is that in the manufacturing process, generally speaking, the carbon footprint on a per unit basis, so whatever you want per cubic meter, per cubic foot, the manufacturing process or extraction and manufacturing process of an engineered wood product is significantly lower than the emissions and the footprint of steel or concrete in the manufacturing process as well.
I will just add that I think this helped me a lot. So when I first started learning about mass timber and deciding that I wanted to work in this space, the chemicals, I was very concerned. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, does this off gas? What's going to happen to the people who are working in the factories or living in the buildings? And so I went and spoke with this green chemist, a very well-reputed green chemist at UC Berkeley, who's been working in this space for a long time and like had been an activist against toxic chemicals. You know, I was like, okay, this guy's gonna like tell me, don't do this. These chemicals are terrible. And what ended up happening was he said, I wouldn't worry about this. This is not an issue. Yes, we need better adhesives in manufacturing. The ones that we're currently using in the market are the best available. Yes, you know, factories need to have protective policies and practices in place for the workers. In terms of residents living in buildings with those adhesives, he said they will have off-gassed pretty much completely by the time they're in the building. And he said the benefits of using and building with mass timber far outweigh the impacts of these chemicals. However, I am so excited for the day when we are implementing all of those lignin-based adhesives that are biodegradable and we don't even have to think about this anymore. So we can make them better, and MSU is doing that.
Yeah, and I see the letter from Michigan Environmental Council, being familiar with that organization in Charlotte. You know, I know the enviro justice issues with steel manufacturing in Southeast Michigan are certainly an issue. So yeah, I certainly could see positive environmental impacts there. So thank you for explaining. Vice Chair?
Probably for Mr. Dempsey, actually. Okay. Did you want to talk about the ordinance language first before I ask you questions about it?
Sure, yeah, I can give a sort of quick overview of the ordinance. So the ordinance defines what a mass timber building is. It references back to the International Building Code. The current Michigan Building Code is subject to an update. We're on 2015, and that should be happening this fall, which is going to incorporate the mass timber language, which will be helpful because we like to have some concurrence between what we have to enforce on the building side and what would be in the zoning ordinance. So that would be helpful. Might be some questions about the extent of the structural framing that would really qualify, right? Because if I put in a couple beams here or there, does it meet the intent of this? Something to consider. In terms of the biggest zoning change, though, what this would do would be to change particular uses in building height. So it would give by site plan approval a right to develop up to 160 feet, so substantially more than would happen unless you went through the special use permit process. That's also same for the two uses, a building that's predominantly office use or a building that's predominantly residential with no more than 3 beds per unit would be under site plan approval and not subject to special use permit review. So that is a significant change, and the intent as presented is that is sort of the trade-off, right? You heard of all the benefits this evening that would accrue from using this material compared to traditional building materials, but in exchange then the developer of such a property within the core DDA district, so Abbott, Albert, Bailey, and Grand River would be able to just go through the site plan approval process. Now, historically, changes like that have not been embraced by City Council over time. That's just a fact, and you're all well aware of this because East Lansing does not have redevelopment-ready community status from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and that is the primary holdup, right? That our community has an extensive amount of projects subject to SUP. We do not have many just subject to site plan review, and that's been a long-standing issue. So I just want to put that out there because that is going to be a question as we move this forward. So that's my summary.
Yeah. So just the text of the ordinance. the section 50.806 talks specifically about mass timber building within the overlay district, built to a maximum of 160 feet, but it doesn't exclude any other type of building within that same district. And so the sentence that follows is actually the only sentence that would have been in the ordinance without that addition.
That's correct.
Are you looking at it
Right.
too?
So
I'm just curious why mass timber would be called out when it really applies to a mass timber building and any other building, because we're not talking here about the removing it from the special use permit process. We're basically just calling it out as a mass timber building. I'm just curious why.
Well, here, I think if you look at, I'm going to go to 5036 because that's the distinction.
Yep,
So
and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, so that would be the site plan review. Probably the better.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm with you now. Yep.
Yeah.
So basically, that's actually a back reference to the taking it away from this
Yeah,
the special use permit, which is the next 2 pages away.
Yeah, that's correct. Section 5036 talks about site plan review, and then subsequent to that is the special use permit.
So basically, it's saying at that opening part, mass timber could be reviewed as part of a site plan. Everything else would remain in the special use permit. Well, I guess depending on, you have to go to the special use permit portion to actually clarify that, but that's the separation there. That's why it's specifically called out.
Yeah, so we have sort of this tiered system. 5035 talks about projects only subject to building permit.
Right.
Single-family home would fall under that category. 5036, right, is now your site plan review, and then after the site plan review is the next level, which is the special use permit. So.
Okay, and then I see, and then I'll just cite the portions. 50-9 or 592, parent 1, item J and K. J is clearly, that's actually removing, or specifically referring to mass timber buildings and removing it from the part in the next section, 2F, where it says specifically multifamily dwelling units, because 2F refers to special use permits. So this is basically taking it from the special use permit portion of the code and moving it up into the non-special use.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so then an additional question, and maybe actually you just answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's on my sheet here. Part K refers to an office use or establishment provided within the mass timber building. But again, we actually refer to office building or office uses under Part 1C. So again, it's calling out a specific use, a specific use, an office use under Part C, but then it sort of doubles it up under Part K. And I don't see a reference back to other portions of the code. And I'm just curious, is that, again, I'm not taking any objection to any of this. I'm just really asking for clarification.
Yeah, and I think my understanding is that the intent here is that those are the primary uses, and that the additional use, both of them read, which also contains one or more of the other principal, right? The mixed use notion, but those would be principal in that sense. Now, David Pearson crafted this. He's not able to be here this evening.
I wouldn't have even asked if I'd have known that, because I'm sure he's sharp. Yeah.
So, we can make sure that's the reason, but that was my understanding here, that trying to recognize that those two particular uses, but it does sort of beg the question of, for instance, if a theater came forward and wanted to be the primary use, my read of that is that based on how these are crafted, those don't necessarily fall into that same criteria unless there was another, again, unless it was connected either the multifamily or the office use. So we'll get clarity around that.
Okay, thanks. This came up as part of when we reviewed the form-based code as a potential ideal way to permit additional height, right? It was going to be one of the potential benefits or one of the potential bonuses that we called it, that Commissioner Wolf was all about. Yeah, it was all about basically providing for innovative construction methods and using those to construct a building would be a good reason to permit the additional height that you're talking about in this particular zone. So it seems to me to be absolute. I mean, that's still sitting with council too, but But it does seem to follow the, discussions that we've had in the past regarding the use of he specifically called out mass timber, I think. That's my recollection.
I don't remember if that made the draft, though.
I don't know either, but it certainly has something we certainly discussed before.
Yeah, I recall that from the work group meetings too. I don't remember where we landed on it, but.
Yeah, and we can go back and revisit sort of where that stood. So.
Mr. Dempsey, I just had a process question. So what are we doing with this tonight? We're not voting on anything?
No,
Potentially,
it was.
If this is an ordinance, is it going to be brought before us later, or what's the next step for this?
Yeah,
Is
the
really
next
what I'm asking.
step will be to go to the Commission on the Environment for their sort of introduction, get some feedback there. We'd certainly like sort of any feedback that you might have, recognizing also that this is sort of an introduction to the concept. I mean, I think if people are generally supportive, the intent, I think, would be then to take it to council and see if they're willing to introduce it as a formal ordinance, and then it would come back to you for a recommendation, because it is modifying your ordinance, the zoning ordinance, so. But if you have any other feedback, either this evening or afterwards, if you want to provide it to me, I can certainly forward it on to the representatives from Midwest Strategy Group, and we'll sort of go from there. It's possible that council may just introduce and send it back. They may also want to form, a special committee of the three, the DDA, the Planning Commission, and Commission on Environment. The other thing that's sort of happening out there, as you may know, the Commission on the Environment has been working to update the green building policy, which addresses incentives for projects that use green building techniques. So that is being resurfaced as well. This may potentially get linked up at some point, or not. They may still remain separate. The difference there is that ultimately is a policy of council, because those are discretionary decisions, whereas decisions on the zoning ordinance are often evaluating whether or not it's imbued right for the property owner.
Thank you, that's helpful. Commissioner Williams?
I have one more question, but I'm not sure who it's for. Especially given this packet of materials and the widespread support for the concept, I'm assuming that this sort of an ordinance with the trade-off on height, perhaps maybe some other issues too, might be considered in other communities in Michigan. Is that the case?
So the experts from MSU had shared with us that we would be the first community looking at an ordinance of this nature in Michigan that they're aware of. So we can certainly do additional due diligence, but I understand we'd be the first. So
interesting.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. That brings us on to, and thank you for your presentation and answering those questions. It was really informative and helpful for us, I think. So we'll move on to item number 9 now. Commissioner concerns. Are there any commissioner concerns? I knew you were going to have Commissioner Williams.
I'm wondering if Mr. Jensen could give us an update on staffing.
Yeah.
As much as we appreciate your presence and really value your
Sure.
work and time
No.
with us.
No, we're hoping to interview a couple individuals for a senior planner position. We have not been able to identify enough qualified candidates for the planning and zoning administrator position. So we've been pushing that out there and just trying to get the word out. But in talking with the Michigan Association of Planning, it's not uncommon right now across the state, but certainly it's a position we've not been in the past. We've always sort of gotten applicants for this role. So we'll continue to push. Hopefully we can at least get that senior planner on board, and then we'll continue to move forward to fill the other 2 positions, which in addition to the administrator, probably another an associate planner level position to be fully staffed.
Thank you.
Good question. Thank you for the update. Any other comments or questions? If not, I believe a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Moved by Vice Chair Bowman.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Denault. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. We are adjourned at 9:11.